Jason Greenblatt is a name that you probably heard us saying quite often here on the news during Donald Trump's presidency, and that's because he was one of the key figures behind the deal of the century. That's Trump's Middle East peace plan, where he served as a special representative for international negotiations. Well, today, Greenblatt is joining us for a very, very different reason. The former U.S. envoy to the Middle East is starting a blockchain and crypto investment fund here in Israel called Silverstone Global Partners, and he's doing it side by side with former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Danny Ayalon, and former Israeli ambassador to South Korea, Uri Gutman. And joining us as well is Roy Ramon, a former investor at Intel Capital, who's also going to be co-managing this innovative fund. So thank you all for joining us. We have a lot of questions, and Jason, I, of course, have to start out with you. You know, we're not going to start out with what's happening with the crypto market. I'd like to learn more about the fund. Tell us a little bit about it, what space you're working in.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. People are incredibly excited about blockchain. People are incredibly excited about Israel's innovation, despite the complexity of the region and some of the mainstream media reports about Israel. People understand that Israel continues to produce time and time again amazing innovation, amazing investments, and that's why we're focused here on blockchain and Israel.
All right. So, you know, Danny, I kind of am interested to know how this idea came to fruition. When did the seeds for this idea begin to sprout, per se?
So, first of all, to build on what Jason said, you know, Israel is the hub of things. You know, major technologies are coming out of Israel. Israel is the startup nation. It's now the scale-up nation. And here, it's not just regular technology. It's really deep down. So, before we started about thinking about this fund, we have had long and hard thinking for over a year. How can we leverage what's unique in Israel? And it's not just any technology. It's something that will be actually all across the board. And we realized that blockchain is the thing. Blockchain today is what the internet used to be 25 years ago. So it's going to be everywhere, over the board, and this is the infrastructure, and this is where we decided we're not investing in crypto or anything speculative on a separate issue. We are actually going to delve into the infrastructure, the technology that will change how business is done, how finance is done, how everything. And we believe that Israel is the place to be, because one of the startups that we're going to invest in may be the next Google for blockchain.
Well, obviously the ecosystem is huge here when it comes to blockchain infrastructure. I'd like to turn to you, Roy, to ask a little bit about the market right now. Obviously, investors are shaking in their boots right now by the downturn of Bitcoin, of cryptocurrency. This is a roller coaster that we know goes up and it goes down. So I'm interested to know how it's been influencing the creation of this fund and what other sectors you're also focusing on investing in as well.
So when we look at the fund, we look at the blockchain as a technology. Crypto is only a very small portion of that. So all of the interesting use cases that are happening from blockchain are not necessarily related in the crypto market. So this is one thing. Second thing, it's always good to start investing when the market is down. It's the best time and best opportunity to do so. The other part is when we look at the cryptocurrency as a whole. Cryptocurrency is something that is changing the way that we going to live. The manifestation of ideas can become much easier. For example, today there is a company called StepN that is selling shoes, digital shoes, and they're making, in the last 8 months, they made $1 billion in revenues. And so this market is constantly growing, especially driven by games and the metaverse and Web 3.0 transition. But it's not going only to affect the gaming industry, also the financial industry, but also many other industries.
Now, Jason, obviously, you spoke a little bit about the focus on Israel, but it's very interesting to see, you know, so many former U.S. officials are choosing to invest specifically in the Middle East. Your portfolio, I'd like to kind of hear about how much it's focused on Israel specifically, but how do you think the Abraham Accords have impacted, you know, I guess the flourishing of relations and investment within this region?
So I think the Abraham Accords, which is just a historic achievement, allowed people to focus on the region. People understand it's complex, people understand it has its dangers, but people also understand that each of the countries in the region has a tremendous vision for the future. And I think that my colleagues, my friends, who are focusing on this understood that because we all worked in the region. We all learned deeply about the region. Our fund in particular is not only going to focus on Israeli tech, but also look to technology from the other countries. If it's not a two-way street between the countries in the Abraham Accords, it's not going to work. So we're definitely going to look at other countries' technology as well.
Right. Danny, I'd like to understand kind of what the distribution is actually of where investment is going to go.
Wonderful. So 70% of all the funds will be invested here because this is where the deep technology is, whether it's blockchain, whether it's cyber, whether it's quantum computing, AI, of course. So it's going to be focused here. Also, the management team is here. Roy, which is the managing partner from Intel Capital, he and his team are very focused on finding the right startup. So we're going to be probably diversified into about 10 to 12 Israeli startups in different stages, but that will add value to the entire industry of blockchain. So they will be really making the nuts and bolts upon which everything will be done. Just like the internet today, this is what the blockchain is. So we will be mostly here, but we're also going to not to shy away from if today it's a global market. So if we see an interesting and promising companies in the United States, anywhere else, we will also look at that as well.
Okay, that is important to keep in mind. We spoke about this a little. I have sources that say that so far, Silverstone has raised about $40 million. What is your target here? Maybe, Roy, you want to speak to that?
Actually, I'll let Danny maybe answer
well,
that.
Sure. Well, our target is a $100 million fund. We will probably make the closing very soon, and then we'll start deployment. And so far, there's been tremendous interest. First of all, in the United States. Secondly, here in Israel. There is a lot of money here in Israel, and many sophisticated investors that are also very keen to associate with us. And what is Jason's expertise, of course, is the Gulf countries. Of course, there's a lot of money there. They're also looking into Israeli technology, and there's could be a lot of cooperation with them. So it's very promising, and we believe that in a very short while we will start deployment.
So I'm interested to know, obviously, Abraham Accords, very, very exciting. Establishment of diplomatic ties with Gulf Arab states, but who do you think is going to be next? Do you have more of the inside information, and are we going to perhaps see your fund work with investors from other parts of the region other than just the United Arab Emirates per se or Bahrain?
It's always hard to predict who's going to be next. I like to call those countries that haven't signed it, have not yet signed it, as opposed to won't sign it, and we don't know if it's going to happen in a month, a year, 5 years. The most important thing is having business with them, continuing to talk to them, let them understand Israel, let Israel understand them. And it's a lot of work, but it's important work. I'm coming up with a book in July called In the Path of Abraham, and the title is because this is a very long path. We're only at the infancy right now, but there's just tremendous promise, so we have to keep working at it.
I'm interested to know why it is so important for you to do business with Israel as well. I mean, beyond obviously just the blossoming and obviously very strong startup core that we see in this country, not only in blockchain, but just across the spectrum. What else drives you to work in this region?
Look, I love Israel, always loved Israel, a huge supporter of Israel, but over the course of my nearly 3 years at the White House, I learned all about the Gulf, I learned about Morocco, I realized how similar the societies are culturally, religiously, even though they're two different religions, how well they get along, how well they could respect each other and learn from each other. I'm just deeply passionate about it.
So yeah, you're going to be making a lot more visits here. I mean, Danny, I'm interested to also know, I guess what your hope is in terms of the next step for this investment fund. How quickly do you think that you're going to be choosing who you invest in? Are there any names that you would perhaps want to share? I know that still beginning stages.
Yeah, well, there are quite a few names. I don't know if we can disclose it. Roy knows it better because they all are being checked.
Yes.
And the due diligence is done by Roy and his professional team. But I would say that we have quite a full magazine, if I may say, in store, so we can really pick and choose the ones that are the most promising. And as I said, it's not something which is just on one vertical. We're looking for the companies which will make it all over the board, a technology which will serve the entire landscape of blockchain. This is what we're looking for.
Yeah, so companies that will generate intrinsic value. that have some technological advantages on others. So right now we're talking to a few cybersecurity. Obviously the blockchain is going to generate a big impact because it will create a new attack surface for hackers. So cybersecurity is going to be an issue that will be important and need to be very well handled. And the second part is leveraging the deep tech that exists in Israel, which is the processor manufacturing and hardcore technology. And I think that's one of the key factors that we're focusing at least at the beginning with handling our portfolio.
All right, well, for anybody who's watching and is working in this sphere, I think you've got all the information you could possibly need to know if this is the right team for you. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Very exciting, and obviously we're going to be, keeping our eye on who you do ultimately end up investing in. Maybe we'll come and film some stories.